There has been a huge change in the last 10 years that we all need to recognize, which is that globalization has knitted the world together. And we do suddenly have two gigantic countries with more than 1 billion people each on a playing field in which they weren't there before. The fact is, the West got a free pass for all these years because India and China had taken themselves out of play, weren't able to play, and now they're back, and we need to find a way for all of us to compete together.
Robyn Meredith, talk to us about the elephant and the dragon.
It's silly in a way for us to compare and contrast India and China. They are such opposites, and yet we always group them together, of course, because they're the two gigantic billion-plus nations that are growing fastest. They're the fastest growing big economies in the world. So I suppose it's natural for those of us from the West to lump them together. But they're as opposite as Gandhi and Mao. And for me, I really do think of it in terms of elephants and dragons, because for me, India is an elephant. It's lumbering along. You know, sometimes it stops, then it goes again, but it always gets to where it's going. And China is like a dragon. It's going so fast, and yet others see it breathing fire on people. They're afraid of China in some ways. And so that analogy is always in the back of my head when I think of the two. I am not a bear on India like Ronnie is. Actually, I think they are both rising just in very, very different ways. And I think that, that if you start with really the basic appearances of both, then you can begin to see these things. I don't know how many of you have been to India. You've all obviously been to China, since we're here now. But they look very, very different. China, look at the place where we are now. It looks like the West. It's extremely modern. It looks more modern than the West. I think, as Bob Rubin said in front of a group in Hong Kong, he said, if you were to land at JFK or you to land in Shanghai, which would you think is the developed country? For Frank, he has very different issues than many American companies in China, because he cannot move his factories to China. But for those companies that can, those companies who are making shoes or laptop computers or numerous other products, the undervaluation of the renminbi, which economists variously put it at 20 to 60%, usually sitting around 40%, it generally benefits U.S. consumers and U.S. companies or European companies that move work to China. And that's where largely the benefits go, those exporting from China, whether they're Chinese or American or European companies. The second thing is, I think that there are some consequences to what Dan is talking about that come along further down the line, and I'd like to hear Dr. Zadia talk about them as well. It seems to me that if China did rapidly revalue its currency and raise the value of renminbi against the dollar, what we would see is that Chinese industry, generally speaking, would be forced to move up the value chain, and so would in fact compete more directly against American companies that are making higher tech products. And we might in fact, if our aim is to be competitive with Chinese companies, we might in fact create more problems for ourselves by pushing so strong for a revalued renminbi. What I'd like to do is remember something that Helmut Panke said a couple of years ago in Shanghai at a Forbes conference. We were talking about branding, and the question came up, well, what is a brand? What is it? How do you define it? And Panke has the best and shortest answer I've ever heard, which is, a brand is a promise. A promise. You can't touch it. It's in your head. It is a promise. And the funny thing is, I was talking to John Quelch on the phone a couple of weeks ago in preparation for this panel, and I said to him, what is a brand? And he said, a brand is a promise fulfilled. I said, what did you say? A brand is a promise fulfilled. So the two of these guys are in great agreement on what a brand is, and I think those are the best definitions I've ever heard.